Hello. Oh, good response, brilliant. Right, this is our last panel of the day. It's our expert panel. It's the future of the automotive industry. As I'm sure you all know, the automotive industry is facing some troubling times at the moment. Many areas of the industry are struggling, and some are even calling out for help from the government. Brexit is looming, Dieselgate is continuing to cause issues, and falling car sales are hurting dealerships and manufacturers. This is getting really depressing, isn't it? Hopefully our panelists are going to be able to make us all feel a little bit happier. Please put your hands together and welcome them to the stage. Welcome. Okay. For those of you who don't know, I'll do some quick introductions. Firstly, we have Mike Hawes. He's the Chief Executive of the SMMT. We've got Jeremy Hicks. He's the Managing Director of Jaguar Land Rover. Richard Jones. He's the Managing Director of Black Horse. And Nigel McMinn is the Chief Operating Officer at Lucas Group. Thank you all for giving up your time today. So let's try not to make this too depressing, but I'm going to start with a really depressing question. Are we hurtling headlong towards a recession, Mike?
Towards a recession? No.
Good.
I think growth isn't, you've seen since the referendum, growth forecasts have declined, and that has flowed through to business and consumer confidence. But the economy is still growing, and as all the economists keep saying, the fundamentals are still very strong. There's uncertainty out there, undoubtedly, and that is depressing demand, but it doesn't look like we're going towards a recession unless we do something really stupid and fall out of Europe with absolutely no deal, which again is an increasingly receding prospect.
Jeremy, what are your thoughts? Do you think the signs are troubling enough to signal a recession?
Ditto Mike, really. I think there's no doubt the last 12 months have been hard. I think ever since Brexit, frankly, it's been hard work. Fundamentals are good. There was hope in April, the market was a lot better. You know, it was up by 10%. We certainly had a very strong April. Order banks are feeling a lot stronger. I think the interesting thing is about the British consumer. The British consumer will only put up with misery for so long. And it's that simple, I think, that we see as soon as, you know, when people have seen wage growth, unemployment historically low levels, interest rates still historically low levels, and people have just said, look, I'm going to get on with my life. And certainly we're seeing that. We're seeing certainly an uptick in inquiries generally. So yeah, I'm kind of with Mike. I've got reasons to be cheery, although it's not plain sailing. I'm not going to claim that for a moment.
Richard, what are your thoughts?
Struggling to add anything different, really. No, we're in a really benign period. Interest rates are low, inflation's under control, real wage growth is actually now growing for the first time in a decade. So yeah, we've got this big uncertainty on the horizon, but the UK is getting on with it. There's very little recession risk in the economy. It all hinges on what happens on a post-Brexit deal, but even then, you've got to go to a really bad scenario to think that things are going to, go bad. The one thing that's lagging is consumer confidence in big purchases. That has taken a hit in the last sort of 9 months, and I think the closer Brexit gets, or the reality of Brexit gets, the more the big decisions customers worry about. But we're in a pretty benign, but actually a pretty stable environment, and I don't expect that to change.
Nigel, are you optimistic?
I'm always optimistic, James.
I know.
As you know, so I can't add a lot to that, other than the fact that I think if ever there was going to be a big slowdown in demand, we'd have seen it over the last year or two. And actually, in truth, the drop in registrations that we've seen has been a lot more about diesel, in our view, than it's ever been about drop in demand. And even today, so far this year, our order take is up in every single month compared to last year. So, if this is the consumer sitting on their hands and there's some pent-up demand still to come, I think we've got every reason to be optimistic, James.
So if you four were to form a government right now, what would you do?
And what would the party be called?
In terms of the industry, well, the first thing you do need, I would suggest, is to address that confidence gap that we've just described. You know, for me, I think we're right, that one of the main obstacles for a booming market has been that lack of clarity around diesel, the future of diesel, whether you can still drive into Manchester or some other cities. The first thing you need is more clarity on that. That yes, diesel has a role in the near, medium, potentially long-term future of mobility. The issues around air quality do need to be addressed, but it is not the sole responsibility of the road transport industry and the automotive industry to solve the problems which originate in a much wider variety. And I hope this week, if we go to reality, that we'll see the Secretary of State for Environment making some similar points about the contribution other sectors would make. There's a start of a 10.
Can I push on that one? Because I think for me, I just build on this point about there needs to be clarity. Frankly, in the market, there's so much confusion now. Frankly, created by the government in terms of is it okay even to buy an internal combustion engine car anymore? And that's caused an untold amount of hold off. And then on top of that, diesel. You know, we're you know, to be frank, we're heavily diesel dependent. We sell a lot of diesel cars, so it's in my interest to understand what's going on. You know, we went out and asked consumers. Half of consumers don't even know what the EU standards are. They think EU6. A number of them think EU6 is a lower standard than EU1, for instance. A third of consumers don't know and understand what the difference in impact between petrol and diesel engines is from a CO2 point of view. And then you've got taxation policy, and this is where we come back to the government, where the government have a unclear taxation policy that's basically saying, just don't go out and buy one. And that's causing this untold amount of hold-off. So, you know, our picture, we've been very public with government, is to say, make it clear. Be really, really clear about what you mean. Because it doesn't do any of us who are involved in the industry any good. You know, we've got the road to zero at 2040. There'll be no more internal combustion engine cars. That's fine, but last year it was only 2% of the market. We've got a long way to go before we get to that no more combustion engines. So that's what I'd be doing is getting clarity back, and I think that would provide a high degree of stimulation back into the marketplace as well.
Richard, you're in Downing Street. What are you doing?
Well, I'd certainly get rid of the cat because I'm allergic to them. But I think for me, you know, the best way to make progress on the government's air quality agenda is firstly to make it not just about cars, because most emissions in the UK are not driven by cars. Cars is actually the minority contributor. And the second thing I'd do is I'd get old cars off the road. And to the points Mike and Jeremy made, provide a clear set of guidelines for consumers. You know, you can go into the new ultra-low emission zone in London driving your 4.5 litre diesel-powered car, as long as it's Euro 6. How many people thought you could take a 4 litre diesel into the ultra-low emission zone and not get charged? But that's the reality. So in some of the sort of facts, and that's down to Transport for London, not the government, in some of the facts out there, we do have some real sanity, but no one's grouping it together for consumers and saying, actually, look, for most of you, an electric vehicle is 3 or 4 buying cycles away. So yeah, it's kind of interesting, but it's probably not going to be for you. So what do you do when you're buying a car now? Oh, by the way, if you're in a Euro 3 or Euro 4, we need you out. We need you out of that car, and we need you into a more modern vehicle. So let's create a strategy around those strands and then actually deliver it in a way that customers say, okay, I get that, and I get the role I have to play as a consumer in helping to improve air quality in the UK, and I feel I'm working with a government that's actually going to help me get there and incentivize me to do the right thing and, you know, generate the right behaviours. So that's what I do, and get rid of the cat.
So just to add a couple of the points to what the points that have already been made, James. So firstly, I think I'd like to see central government coordinate better with local government. I think the fact that there seems to be this sort of free-for-all to allow local authorities to ban cars or charge them more for parking in town centres is part of what's creating the consumer uncertainty. So I'd definitely like to see something, you know, more coordinated approach, which is a balance of NOx and CO2. You know, it seems to have gone far too much towards air quality, and we've forgotten about the ozone layer. I'd definitely like to see a fairer taxation regime or regulation regime with buses, lorries, aeroplanes. Far too much seems to be focused around the car, and it's not the only pollutant of air quality. And I think the final thing, slightly disconnected to all of that, is that the amount of regulation that we seem to face as an industry is ever increasing. So the amount of time that we spend on GDPR, FCA regulation, health and safety, lots of other issues, seems disproportionate to the consumer benefit. And if you're to build it all in properly, the customer experience suffers as a result of it. I don't think that the balance is not right with that just now.
Have we lost the battle for diesel completely? Is diesel now dead, Mike?
Absolutely not. As Jeremy said, there is confusion. I would say the government hasn't helped matters. We want more clarity from government. But remember, diesel still offers a saving in terms of fuel economy for the consumer. It offers a benefit in terms of CO2 emissions. Looking at last year, the total fleet average of UK sales, CO2 actually went up for the first time since we started recording, up by 0.8%. That is because diesel motorists are sitting on their hands. We need to make sure they have the confidence to go back into the market, because diesel as a technology will be around for many years. There was an engine symposium a couple of weeks ago in Vienna, and someone from Daimler, I think it was basically saying, we can build now a diesel engine which will be 30 grams per kilometre. Last week, I think it was, you saw a press announcement from Bosch, which was basically saying we can meet RDE Standard 2 using existing technology, but with some slight improvements, which could be ready to go effectively in the next model cycle. The solutions are there. What we always ask from government is a technology-neutral approach. Set the ambition for air quality, set the ambition for climate change and CO2. Let the industry innovate to meet that target.
So you speak to the government and ministers more than anyone else. How do they get it so wrong, in your opinion?
Invariably, there's always a combination of factors. Air quality needs to be addressed, especially in a number of our cities. I think invariably also there is a degree of politics that gets involved, and at the moment I would probably suggest that the cabinet isn't a unified single entity. It's made up of lots of individuals, and clearly some of them will want to make sure that they have their opportunity to put their own areas of responsibility forward. I think the industry, clearly we lost trust with the whole Dieselgate issue. You cannot ignore that. It did bring into question the industry. There was an exaggerated response to a certain extent, and people were conflating a number of different issues. As Nigel was saying, the confusion between CO2 and emissions. Following the Dieselgate and crisis, we did something like 4 or 5 select committee inquiries. And there was still, in people of positions of authority, failing to understand or distinguish between a test cycle, an RDE, and what you're measuring between climate change and CO2 and what you're measuring with the regulated emissions. It is a complicated area. Test a vehicle, certify a vehicle, you've got a book this big of regulations you have to meet. What really matters is keeping the message simple for the consumer. And to a certain extent, that's what's been lost in all this mix.
Jeremy, do you think diesel sales will ever get back to the 50-50 they were before in the market, or is it lost forever?
No, I don't. So I'm with Mike. I don't think it's lost forever. But then, of course, I would say that. I think that there's a few points about yes, we can't be trusted as manufacturers. We come through the door and we can't be trusted. It starts from that position of saying you are, because you're not telling the truth fundamentally, because there have been examples where people have been manipulating tests. And of course, that's also caught up at the same time when there's a move from the testing regulation, purely laboratory-based, to real-world testing. And the two get caught together, say, we can't get in the real world what we did under the old testing regime, WLTP. We support WLTP. It's the right thing to do because it makes it much more representative. And those two things have been mashed together. And then you're in Mike's world of saying, well, therefore, you can't be trusted to tell us the truth. We're actually seeing now customers, and it was my opening comments about how the British public will only put up with this so long. We saw our diesel sales increase last month. our evidence says that people are saying, actually, we spend a lot of time also communicating. So what we find is when people come into the showroom, it's typically the pub question. And I get it in the pub, which is, what should I buy? What car should I buy next? And to my simple answer to that is, depends what sort of driving you do, really. And it's that simple. What sort of driving you do? And we've spent a lot of time investing in getting that message across to consumers that it's not as straightforward as diesel, petrol, or alternative drive. Think about it and take the advice. So we've found that by equipping salespeople with that knowledge and capability and confidence, so they can answer the question. And so we've seen sales were up for us, diesel sales last month were up by, we saw 16% growth. And I think, and actually, I breathe the same air as everyone else in this city, this lovely city of Manchester and all the other cities. I do, my kids do. I'm interested in seeing air quality improve just like anyone else. And it's wrong that diesel should be demonised in this way because, as Mike said, 20% better CO2. Or, it was, the point that was made is greenhouse gas just doesn't seem to be on anyone's agenda anymore. And the truth is it has to be a blended policy. So I think it will come back. There's no doubt. We will win. I think it's a battle that we can win, bring back our way with a continued determined effort. And the government are now starting to listen. We're starting to witness that. You saw Greg Clark talk last week and talking positively about diesel having an important part in the future. So the message is landing, definitely.
Richard, do you think the same?
Yeah, I do. I'm sitting there funding all types of vehicles, all types of engines. We have, a growing range of hybrids, electric vehicles. We obviously have larger diesel and petrol fleets. So I think you've kind of got to look back and look at, well, it took diesel 20 years to become part of, a mainstay part. And it should probably take us 20 years for it to sort of go back again. That's a good, healthy, progressive, steady policy. Customers can understand it. You've got all kinds of complications in moving to an electrified world, which I won't kind of, but there are so many infrastructural complications, technological complications, taxation complications. I mean, what about in a world where electric is 50% of all cars on the road? Do you have any sense how much the government makes out of fuel? More than 90% of what we're paying for goes straight to the revenue. Well, how does that work in a world where we're not using fossil fuels? So there's so many things that are going to take a very long period of time for us to get right. Industry, government, regulators, and so we've just got to kind of, move in a very steady, progressive way. The scale of the shift back on diesel in the last year tells you that is not progressive. That is a huge knee-jerk reaction caused, as both of these gentlemen have said, by massive uncertainty in the customer's mind. And that will start to dissipate as the UK consumer is very good eventually at figuring out what's really what. And so, yeah, I'm with these guys. I think diesel will edge back a bit, and then it will find its natural place, and it will probably, go down then steadily over a very long period of time. And that's a good progressive place to be in. It's good for consumers. You've got to remember there's 68 billion of loans against cars in the UK. Okay, nobody gets any prizes or wins anything by having shock treatments from one technology to the other. So yeah, I think it will come back, and then it will settle, and then it will gradually transition to different types of technology. But we've got a very long road before electric technology is the mainstay, and we can consider it, stable and have the right infrastructure in the UK to be successful.
Nigel, what about the showroom floor?
I don't know whether it's a blessing or a curse to be last every time, James.
Yeah, I'll start with you next. Or Rebecca will.
So, I agree with Richard. It doesn't, to some extent, it's inevitable that there will be a long, slow, gradual decline of diesel. The kind of artificial speeding up of the pace of decline, I think everybody can see that's a knee-jerk reaction. It feels to me like diesel will move from its current 30%, I think it was 30% of the mix in April. It could end up being somewhere in the mid-20s, as far as I'm concerned, because when you see these cars here, obviously Jeremy's new I-Pace, available now if anyone wants to buy one, having liked the
Nice
look of
plug.
But that now that's got the same range of Tesla. I mean, you know I'm not particularly keen on this word disruption because that suggests that things happen over a sort of 2 or 3 year timescale. But you have to say Tesla has forced the established OEMs to develop this sort of technology quickly. And in a world where these electric cars do 400 or 500 miles, similar to a tank of fuel, you know, I can see it being dominated by electric, hybrid, and for those enthusiasts, there'll still be petrol engines.
Can I just add something? Just say that I think that the bigger issue is actually not about range, it's about charging anxiety. That's where most people tend to be worried now, don't they? About how and where can I charge it up?
But it's a bit like your watch. I wear a watch, I'm going on today, that in theory goes to 4,000 meters under the sea. I'm unlikely to ever go to 4, but it makes me feel really comfortable if I were to drop it in the bath or something.
Yeah. What I want to know is, when we were at CDX 2 years ago, we talked about how the market was going to grow to 3 million car sales in a year. When do you think we'll actually hit that now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still an eternal optimist with this. And if you track new car registrations over a 60-year period, in every block of 15 years, it shows that it jumps by about 400,000 or 500,000 units because it's tracking population. Obviously, if there's more people and GDP continues to grow, more people have wealth, the number of cars in each household grows, you know, the prevailing trend in the long term is that they'll still go up. And I understand there'll be all sorts of forces against that with car sharing, but I think that's just going to take a long time to change the psyche of the British consumer. So I think within 10 years we'll see a 3 million market.
How long do you think it is before the market fully recovers, with your maths head on? I always like hearing these from you.
How long it recovers from where it is today? Well, I mean, I think that what we're seeing today is a lot of pent-up demand, so this could happen a lot sooner than 10 years. I mean, if this is the market recovering at 2.5 million cars, you know, it's a pretty healthy market, and it's certainly enough, you know, compared to historical levels. But that, again, just fuels my belief that this has got a lot more growth left in it yet. People seem to be in the habit of changing their cars quicker, and then you've got the other factors. So, you know, I think you'll see a quick recovery once there's some certainty around Brexit and diesel and those other issues.
Richard, where do you think the market's heading then?
I'm not sure we're in a period that we have to recover from. You know, we've had.
You're quite happy.
We've had significant growth. Well, I think it's not about being happy or unhappy. It's just about what's sustainable. So, you know, the pre-crisis average was around sort of 2.2. So, you know, 10% on that gets you to less than 2.5, which is pretty much where we are now. You add another 10%, you know, you've got to go 30% plus to get to 3 million. The UK population is not going to grow by 30%. And then you've got to look at the total car park. There's 31 million vehicles on the road. So you can't just look at the new car market in isolation. You've got to look at how, you know, what's the buying cycle, how quickly a car's getting scrapped, and what's the total car park. I'm not sure the UK needs more cars. And it might link back to the point around the environment. If we can actually encourage some of those older, more polluting cars off the road, and in doing so, we drive new car sales, that for me is healthy. But just seeing a boost in new car sales and the total car park continuing to grow, I don't think that's sustainable. And we've also got to all think about used car prices, because, you know, a cycle where car sales jump up and then go down, jump up, is really bad for used car prices. And, you know, 85% of the market, more than 90% of the new car market is financed. Okay, so it helps everybody if there's stability in the used car market. Instability in the used car market is not a good thing for consumers, for motor dealers, for lenders. So I'm not a kind of advocate of saying we should see a 3 million number. I think we just need to see a number that's sustainable. And if we see growth, it's because we're getting old cars off the road, and that for me is a good thing.
What I keep hearing is, because we're selling less new cars, in 3 years' time we're going to be in a position where we don't have enough used cars. Is that seriously an issue to any of you?
Well, the used car market is particularly strong at the moment, I would say. We've been experienced, and it's always a good barometer, because I don't know if it's good or bad, but I've been in this industry nearly 35 years now, And so I've seen a lot of peaks and troughs. And what always surprised me is about when we see the cycles in the market, the recovery always seems to come more quickly than we expect. Everyone says, we're in this for 3 or 4 years, and actually 6 months later you wonder where you were, because you've seen it improve. And invariably it's led by used cars, because what we see is residual values start to firm up, confidence around used cars, and the market moves on. And we're seeing that now. We're absolutely witnessing a very strong used car demand, residual values holding up well, even if diesel's not taking it back there, but they're holding up really, really well. So, I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, I think it's important to put this into context. I mean, we had record years in 2015, all-time record, and then beat that in 2016. All right, last year was down 6% or something, so it's hardly falling off a cliff. In terms of the total car sales, I mean, this is something that was alluded to earlier. Given all the other changing dynamics in the marketplace about shared ownership, I mean, we keep talking about the utilization of a vehicle. If your car sits stationary, either at work or at home overnight for 90% of your time, inherently that's inefficient. So there will be the shift to car sharing. It'll start first in urban centres. But if you're going to share a car and increase utilization, you want that car to be new, you want it to be clean, and you want it to have the latest technology on there. So with that pace of the change, the expectation is you're going to have to turn those fleets over more quickly. So whether we've reached peak car or not is a moot point, and no one can quite anticipate how quickly that change will be. And it may be that we shorten the life of the vehicle because the consumer, a different type of consumer, wants the newer vehicle more readily and more at their summons, such that you have to increase the sheer throughput of volume.
Mike, is a good Brexit deal going to solve all the industry's problems? And if it does, how quickly are we going to get back to normal? And what does that good Brexit deal look like?
What does a good Brexit deal look like? Well, I think it start from the opposite. The worst imaginable deal is we fall out without a deal. In terms of the consumer, that'll put up prices. In terms of manufacturing, that'll add cost, complexity, and obstacles to doing business. So that's, if you like, the worst case scenario. In terms, there's no doubt that this industry in the UK has benefited from being part of Europe. We build European cars for the UK and Europe. It's our biggest export market, and we need to be very careful that we jeopardize our access to that market. Now, a lot of talk at the moment about customs union, and what is the solution to that? We would rather stay in the customs. There are other propositions out there about that relationship. For them to be workable, you need significant investment and an evolution of border technology that isn't there yet. So you need a serious amount of time to be able to implement that. And I think everyone recognizes that. So stay in the customs union until you've got something that is going to work and you've had time to implement it. We don't want tariffs. We don't want restrictions on access to talent. Jeremy will recruit people from all over the world, and he'll want his people to go and work anywhere in the world to get international experience. Regulation, we build cars to a European standard, which is increasingly a global standard. The UK is too small a market to set its own regulations. You would just add additional cost and complexity. So there's a myriad of issues related to it. What matters is safeguarding as many of the things that we currently benefit from as possible. That's not to say you reject the referendum result. It's just say, okay, we are going to leave. How do we make sure that we keep the good bits, and the good bits have benefited this industry, whilst having that freedom to pursue whatever strategy for the longer term you want?
Jeremy, what do you want to see from Brexit? And is it going to solve all the problems?
Ditto. Well, it is simply ditto. For us, we're a British business, a proud British business, fundamentally at heart, with a very strong manufacturing base here. We design and engineer here. As Mike says, we draw skills from all over the globe. It's very narrow-minded, I think, of us as a country to think we're going to isolate ourselves from the rest of the world, because we live on a very, very small planet, and it's just getting smaller by the day. So, I ditto the points Mike made. We also want to grow globally as well. We're not restricted. The UK is very important to us. It's over 20% of our business, but we have desires to really grow the UK, but grow disproportionately outside of the UK. And so you see we've got factories going up around the world, but that's not a deliberate decision to avoid the UK. It's about recognising we're a global business. And somehow that just seems to get lost in everything that's being talked about, and seems to think that, you know, we can just be, you know, so it's like it's going back to, you know, the days of the mid-ages where it was more about villages, and we seem to think the UK can be some sort of cosy village, and we can't. We have to compete on the global stage for multinational companies to be successful. Simple as that.
Richard, how quickly do you think things will get back to normal after Brexit, and how long are we looking at for this to take place?
You cannot say, because you don't know what the deal is. You just can't say. You know, Brexit is a political process that has an economic impact, and you know, at its heart. And we all think about it, and we'll all establish a view on it, whether we're for it or against it, often based on what's going to happen in the next 3 years. Brexit's a 40-year decision. The decision's been taken. We have to go through it. But what it causes in the near term is uncertainty. So for me, it's getting to a decision point, understanding what that means, and then everybody gets to move forward. It's a little bit like, you know, I don't know, it's a little bit like playing Monopoly and someone says, do you know what, I'm going to change all of the rules, but I'm not going to tell you what the new rules are, and I'm not going to tell you when I'm going to tell you what the new rules are. So what happens? Everything kind of stops, and that's exactly where we are. We need to know what the deal is, we need to know what the transition looks like, and then the UK economy will do what it has always done in every situation. It will get on with it, and companies in the UK will adapt and will respond. So the key for me is we know what's happening, we know when it's happening, and then we'll let the economy do what the economy does.
Nigel, if you're a betting man, how long would you say we're looking at uncertainty for?
I think it'll be quite quick. I'm not as clever as these guys. I can't work out what's a good deal and what's not. I'm like a lot of UK consumers that's just bored with it, frankly, and I think we just want some certainty. And it almost doesn't matter, James, what the deal is, as long as it's certain. And I think as a country, as an industry, we're resilient, we're adaptable, and we'll make the best of it. And I honestly think the pound will strengthen quite quickly. As I've said several times, the demand is pretty strong now, and there's a lot of headwinds. I think it'll be a quick bounce back once we get some certainty.
So before we push on, are there any questions from the audience for our panel?
If you stick your hand up, we'll come and find you. No?
Oh, not him.
Right, I'm going to run down.
There's a lot of talk about 2040 road to zero. Is the proposal acceptable to you, that they will allow only hybrid cars, plug-in hybrid cars with a range of 50 electric miles to be sold from that date?
Can I go first, because mine's really easy? Yes, because we're a retailer, we're really not too bothered what people buy. We'll sell whatever's in fashion.
Mike?
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about what's going into this document and when it comes out. It's absolutely right, the government has ambitious targets. We all want to get there. The question is the pace with which you get there. Go too fast, you'll not take your consumer with you, and certainly you'll not take the British, never mind, or the European industry with you, because it needs time to change. The idea of the government said that it wants to end the sale of conventional petrol and diesel cars by 2040. So the critical issue was what determines conventional in 2040. It is a bit of a crystal ball gazing. What the government mustn't do is pick a winner, because I can't tell you in 2040 whether electric is the solution or hydrogen's the solution or something else, synthetic fuels. So I'd rather a more technology neutral approach. So their definition about doing 50 continuous miles effectively picks a certain range of technologies and may rule out others. What matters is addressing climate change and reducing that. Let the industry find the solution. It has done in the past and it will do it again.
Joe, is this a case of the government interfering again where they shouldn't be?
No, I think it's a great question that Jim asked, because we're really interested in making sure we get there. Because I'll say again what I said earlier, and I live on this planet like everyone else. I want to make sure it's here to come. But the truth is, around this whole, the debate is it right to have in the legislation that it has to be 50 continuous miles when PHEVs aren't performing there today? So it's how quickly the technology will enable that. And everyone's getting hooked into that as the key point. But actually, it's Mike's point, which is we want to get to a position where we are a significant net improver. And it's not just about us. So I'm going to take it to a different place, because actually it's about driver behavior. Because for PHEVs to be effective, they have to be charged up. And that is a really important aspect of the PHEV engine, because if consumers don't charge them, then their CO2 performance is worse. So that doesn't sound good to me. And then I'd go to the next place, which is about, so what about the infrastructure that allows this to happen? Because I've already alluded to it to once, that this document absolutely has to include the government's commitment to, are we out here?
Hope not.
Okay. The government's commitment to the charging infrastructure. Because unless that's in place adequately, then we can produce all this wonderful technology that we want. But, we need to get to 300 kilowatt charging, and we need it now. And that will then, enable so much more. And even then, on a lower range PHEV, because the average journey, 99% of all journeys are under 20 miles. So actually, that's not the big deal. It's how quickly I can charge it up once I've got that. So I'm in infrastructure place as well.
Richard, do you think the infrastructure is ready?
Well, we know it's not, so I think that's an easy answer. The thing that interests me is all the debate is about 2040. I don't know about you, but what are you going to be doing in I've got no idea if I'll even be alive in 2040. I'd like to see more from the government policy on, well, what are we going to try and achieve by 2025? And that's got to get back to, well, how do we look at the blend of emissions in the vehicles that are already on the road, and what can we do, industry, government, regulators, to improve that mix? That's what's going to have a benefit to our lungs, to the planet, etc., etc. The debate is about 24, and the debate's also only about the cars that are sold as new cars in 2040. And at any one time, there's over 30 million cars on the road. Let's bring this forward and let's focus on, well, what do we want to try and achieve by 2025? And you get to something that's more practical, like we want to have X thousand charging stations. We're going to put this range of support into customers getting into electrification. But also, we're going to go and focus on those with Euro 2, 3, 4 vehicles, and we're going to help them get out of them. And actually, if we help lots of people get into Euro 6 petrol and Euro 6 diesel, then we'll be in a much, much better place. So more islands of transition is what we also need, not just a debate about what's going to happen in 22 years' time.
So can I be rude to jump in again, just because one more point I meant to say, which is connected to that is, and I've said it before, government thinking that they're going to sort the air qualities of cities out by just demonising car drivers. And the words I've used, which I'll share with you guys, is it's rather like saying we're going to solve the alcoholism problems of the world by banning beer. It will touch the sides. It's everything else that we do.
The wine. Nigel, any points on the 2040 issue?
No, I mean, the only other point I would add is that it seems to have changed from 2050 to 2040. We'll have at least 5 governments before we get there. Who's to say they'll not change it another 10 times before we get there? So, what's 2040 now could be 2060 by the time we get there.
Okay, well, I think that's all we've got time for today. Huge thanks to my panel. We'll be back here tomorrow at 9:30 a.m., starting with a keynote speech from Max, who's from Google. So join Rebecca and I for another day of live stage panels. Hope you enjoy your evening, and thank you very much indeed to our guests.